how we actually collect data. And you can see how easy and difficult, how challenging it is to get data back in the same way. So we've got lots of counties which we asked for, but obviously some people also added in the country, Ireland. So again, this is a lesson for us all in how we collect data and making sure that we have the same data. But it's great to have such a spread from Derry down to Kerry and Donegal, Westmeath, great contingent from Westmeath there, Dublin, and as I said, the biggest cohort. And so you're all very welcome. If you haven't filled out the Mentimeter and you still would like to, please just use the QR code, or you can go to www.menti.com and type in that number there, 1-888-0188. So we'll send these presentations back to you with the slides in them, so you'll see what information everybody gave as it's unfolding. So thanks for doing your homework last night and this morning. It's really helpful for me. And just to say, we won't be going through all the Menti today. Some of it we'll be going through next week, but many of you added in your queries, your concerns, and I'll touch on some of them as we're going. So some of you mentioned concerns about GDPR and so on, and we're going to touch on that next week. And also some of you mentioned about where data is going to and is it where it might be used. So we'll touch on that as well next week. So the next question we asked you from Mentimeter is what your role is and, what program you come from. And again, you can see the data gathering processes. It's so hard. But we've got lots from Community Families, Parent Child Plus. We've got representation from all the programs. And when I come off and I look at it, I'm sure it's going to be fairly equal based on what I see there. So that's great. So thank you all from all the programs. That's great. And the next question I asked you was about your role, I think. So as you can see, we've got about 61% of you are home visitors and 34% of you are coordinators or managers. And we've got some interagency partners also on the call as well. So you're very, very welcome as well. So that's great. And then the next question. So this is a fascinating question. How many years? Now, I had thought I'd have time before we logged on to add it all up and see collectively how many years of experience are actually in the room. But you can see we've got such a diverse range of experience, and some at the very with huge experience up 30 plus years. So we've got 30 plus years, and those of you who are only just starting out on your journey as a home visitor, with the average number of years at 8.7. So that's fantastic. We've got such a wealth of expertise. And then even for our new home, those of you who are starting off as new home visitors, you're in great company in this group with the level of expertise that's here. So that's great. Okay, so we're going to get into what we're doing over the next 3 sessions. Sorry, this is quite busy, this slide. So today, I suppose I just want to introduce you to some of the background for what we're doing. And I'm going to introduce the concept for yourselves to think about yourselves as a researcher, even in the smallest way, in the work you do with your family. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about asking questions. And we've got a panel of home visitors who are going to share some of their experiences about asking questions. And so what I want us to try and do is always keep families central in what we're doing and the concept of them as partners. So, and we're going to revisit that theme throughout the training. The next session, we're really going to look at what outcomes are being proposed for us all as a national programme and what outcomes we might want, as a programme ourselves. A little bit about the national and the work that's happening within the Home Visiting Alliance in terms of logic modelling and so on. And maybe if we have time, we might touch on how we collect that data and what that might mean for you. And then the last session, and this came up in your feedback, we're going to focus on kind of maybe some more of the practical tools and the standardized measures, and talk through maybe two of them or 3 of them, depending on our time, that are currently being used or that are helpful to consider. So I suppose by the end of it all, I just hope that when we're finished, we are all very much aware of outcomes focused working for families in the first instance, what that means for them, for our programs as a whole, and then for the good of all the children that we're working with at a national level. I want everyone to feel comfortable with some of the language that can be thrown around, feel confident about the fact that you yourself have this inquiry role, this research role, and what you feel about that. You feel confident about that you're really come away feeling that I could go and talk to any family now about why we're doing this work and how we might ask questions in a best practice way, and how we might introduce these forms and standardized measures with families in the best way possible for them and for us, for our practice. So really talking about then this is, as I said, we're all on a journey and we're going to be continuing on a journey. It doesn't just stop. So we also need to talk about what things we need to put in place to sustain, to review, and to continue to improve our practice and professional development. So hopefully that's what we're going to address. So just a little bit of background. This has all been funded through What Works, which is a section of the Department of Children. And it's a project that the Home Visiting Alliance are working on together, and they're developing a document to outline how, as a home visiting collective, we want to move forwards in terms of an outcomes framework and gathering data and evidence to support the essential work that you guys do on a day-to-day basis. So they're looking at proposing an outcomes framework, a logic model, different types of data collection. And so they've been working on this for quite some time in September, and have had ongoing consultations with stakeholders throughout. I think the recent one was the end of January. And then our sessions that we've had today, and it says March, it says February to April, but we're going to finish up in March. And the sessions that were held in November, we fed all that back to the document, to the final document, and you'll be able to get a copy of that through your programs once it's. I think there's a planned launch as well for that document, so everybody will be informed about that as well. So I suppose we're all working in different ways to feed up and share information about what would be good for us as home visitors. Okay, so lots and lots has changed. Maybe some of you know all this already, so apologies for repeating it. But I just want to flag that it's a really, really busy time for home visiting in Ireland. And it started really with a commitment in a policy document called First Five, where there was a commitment to explore an approach to home visiting. So that was like 2019. And since then, we've had lots of research, national research, Economic Case for Home Visiting, Unite's National Review of Home Visiting. We've had the creation of a home visiting national programme funded through the Children's Fund. So we have a national home visiting programme manager, Caroline Sheehan, and her colleague Thomas Foley, who's a data officer, and that is located in Tusla. And the Children's Fund, which is a commitment to expand the access and availability of home visiting across the country over a 5-year period. So there's new funding available. So there will be lots of new services developing over the next few years, and some of your existing services will be extending. So it's a very, very busy time for home visiting at the moment. And sometimes when things like this happen, lots is moving very fast, and we're trying to catch up and do some of the work on the hoof and try and learn. So I just want to kind of flag that sometimes things are still a little bit uncertain, but that can be a good thing because we're being consulted about all this and we can shape and inform that. And I have to say that's very much been the tone of the national programme in terms of engagement and listening and wanting to hear from us. So that's been a really positive, very positive thing. And as many of you will have been aware that this is all part of a wider context, and we had our Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, which were national child outcomes, and we'll kind of touch on them a little bit more next session, which is now called Young Ireland. And there's quite a focus in working when we're working with children and families on making sure that the work we're delivering is evidence-based. And, TUSLA have a commissioning framework where they look at how they're going to commission services, and they've really stressed the importance of having evidence-based programs, and that they're the programs they're going to prioritise for funding. And that framework is out of date as well now, and will probably be replaced. So there's lots of focus on delivering programs that have an evidence base, and we'll touch on what an evidence base is in a little bit while, because even that term we can all disagree on, or as well, or not disagree on, but there's different interpretations of it. Okay, so why you guys? And I suppose you are the most important piece of this jigsaw puzzle. You are central to all of the work that we've just been talking about there. You're the ones who are directly working with children and families on the front line. And so, having everybody on board with this way of working and thinking differently about reflecting on our work is really essential. So you are very much the linchpin of this and central to all this, whether it's to your own team, whether it's to the national picture or your local partners. So you guys are really important. So I'm just going to slow down for a second and just ask you all, I'm not going to ask you to share with me, but maybe if you have a piece of paper, and maybe just think, why do we do home visiting? And I just want you to reflect on, if someone asked you why you do home visiting, what might you say? Even think about it in your head for a second. Why do we do home visiting? And as you're thinking about that, I'm just going to, so yeah, it's a question we don't actually get asked. We often get asked what is home visiting rather than why we do it. So this is the essential piece. So many of us, when we're asked why we do home visiting, we often might say, well, we're doing it to support families, we're doing it to connect families. And, obviously that's essential and it's really important to support families. But, we're not being funded just to support families, because what does that mean? We all need support in our lives. So we're being funded, or we are doing this because there's an evidence to say that something changes, something happens. So supporting a family isn't a change for that family. It means they're being supported. So what is the change that we are looking for? So I just want you to think about the what we do versus the why we do it, and how sometimes we mix them up. And it's really important to think about that. And why we do things is because all the programs that we are representing here today have what we call an evidence behind them, to say that something changes by doing this work. And that something could be different for different programs. For some programs, it might be educational changes, outcomes for children. For others, it might be health-related outcomes, it might be relationship outcomes. There are different things that change for children and families as a result of the work we do. And those families might be different themselves. So we have evidence for what we're doing, and that's how the programs evolved and were developed. And then we start doing it. And many of the programs here are quite old in their history and legacy, especially community families, community mothers and LifeStart have been around since the 1980s. So we can't just stop having gotten that evidence and practicing. We need to keep reviewing, is what we're doing still working for families? And we need to commission research to tell us that, but we also need to do it in our work. And so we need to look at new evidence, what's newly emerging. I mean, back in the 1980s, we didn't have the concept, or we didn't use terminology like trauma-informed practice or infant mental health. And they're all very new pieces of developments in the sector that we can now incorporate into our programs. So we need new evidence, not just from what's happening in the sector, but we also need new evidence from our work that we do with families and reflect on that. So we need to gather information to tell us, are we on the right track? Are we making a difference? And then we can start doing that again. So we need to know, are we making a difference? Is anyone better off? Okay, so I'm just going to speed up quickly here, but just to say, as a home visitor, even with one family, you are like a mini researcher for that one particular family in that instance, where you are going in, you're bringing on board the evidence you have already and your training. And you're essentially trying to figure out what's happening, what are the needs of this family, and then how do we know it's working for this family? Do we need to do something different? So you're constantly questioning and making sure you have the right information to make those decisions. And effectively, then we want to get a change for the family. Okay, so research is formalized curiosity with a purpose. So if you imagine yourselves that your purpose is really to make life better for families, children and families, that's our purpose. And so we need to kind of constantly have that level of curiosity, and that's what research is. So just some jargon busting. You're all really good at filling out the Mentimeter. So I'm just going to revisit some of the terminology that we used. Some of the terminology that crosses into that research space, and that is part of the wider kind of evidence outcomes-based working way. So the first one I asked you, and I'm just going to remove that there. So just what you're all familiar with terminology-wise, and it's great. Everyone seems to be really familiar with lots and lots of terms and pieces. If you're not, we're going to revisit them more next week. But a logic model and a theory of change are very similar, and it really is our theory of change is what we hope to achieve, and then what we're going to do to achieve that. So what are the changes or the outcomes we want for families, and what are we going to do to make those outcomes happen? And a logic model is a way of laying that out in a visual way. So we'll revisit that ourselves. The outcomes framework are a list of all those changes, and then what data we need to gather to demonstrate that. Standardized psychometric measures, and I put that in there on purpose. We often, all of us will use checklists and tools as part of our practice, questions. They're often standardized because I'm using them and my colleagues are using them, so they're a standard checklist. But not all of them are what we call psychometric measures, and they're the ones like the TOPS-C that you'll be familiar with, or like Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, or we've mentioned one, the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. They're scales that have been tested scientifically against a wider pool of parents or families. And so they have a rigor to them that's greater than maybe a quick checklist that we've developed ourselves. So we'll revisit those a lot in session 3. Program fidelity. Yeah, so that's very much back to the theory of change piece, because if we're going to say we're going to do X, Y, and Z when we're working with a family and we'll get such and such a result, we then need to make sure we are actually doing X, Y, and Z, and we're not also doing P and Q and R and S. We need to make sure that we are delivering what the evidence tells us we need to deliver to get those results. So that means keeping with the same fidelity to the programme. Evidence-based, we're going to touch on that in a minute. And outputs and inputs are concepts and terms from a logic model, and outputs are effectively all the work we do. Everything we do is an output. The number of visits we do, the amount of time we have visits, the number of phone calls we make. And that is really important to capture, because you are doing so much work on the ground that you probably don't even realise yourselves. Is everything okay with my sound there, Michelle? Sorry. Yeah. Just got a warning there, sorry. So everything we do is really important, and we need to reflect on that and capture that. Just going to double check, sorry. Okay. Okay, so the next one I asked you about, I hope this is all making sense to some of you. Now, just move this around. So the next one I asked you on is how you are, do you have a system in place for reviewing if you're making a difference to the work you do with families. And this is effectively what we're all really trying to work on at the moment, is how we can make a difference to the children and families we work with. And we're all on various parts of that journey as to whether we have a system in place. But hopefully after all this training and with the developments that are happening nationally, we'll all be further away on that journey. Okay, the next one was, I think, 72 responses, which is great. Oh yeah, this is the word cloud, where I asked you all to just describe an outcome in one word. And so loads of you have got loads of different words, like a result, an effect, a change, an impact. So they're all great. So maybe have a look at yourself and see what words now, having done this, what maybe not kind of the best words to use to describe an outcome. So, because we're really looking for change, something, people are better off in some way or another. So that is our outcome. Okay. And the next one. Technology is really amazing sometimes. When I think that you can just enter in your answers and we can get them here straight away, it really is great. So, Jargon Buster, I've got some trick questions here. So tick all the true statements. So outputs are important measures of change. So outputs, as I just said, are all the work you do. So that's really important for us to collect, because we need to make visible the work you do, from all the text messages you send, from all the emails you might send, from all the time you spend working with families. It's really important. But it doesn't actually tell us if anything's changed. What does tell us if something's changed are our outcomes. So our outputs are a measure of all the work we do. It's how much did we do? How much work did we do? So indicators are things like, for example, whether families have attended their immunization appointments. That is an indicator to tell us that if families have done that, then their children are more likely to be in a healthier category. So they're kind of signposts that say our families are on the right track in terms of having a healthy outcome, or it could be an educational outcome. So home learning is a good indicator to tell us that children might do well then later on as they progress through school. So that's definitely true. Indicators do tell us if we're on the right track. Outcomes reflect change for the better, and that's bang on. That's exactly what an outcome is. And everybody was great at this and said outcomes are only necessary for funders. So that's just brilliant. They're not only necessary for funders. Nobody ticked that, and that's brilliant that everybody's really on board about knowing outcomes are important for you and for the parents you work for. And the last one, again, is a little bit of a trick one. It is, parent satisfaction forms are an outcome measure. And often parent satisfaction forms, we're asking, did you enjoy the session? We're asking for their feedback, and they'll tell us things like, oh, I felt, really welcome, or my home visitor was amazing, and so on. And that's really, really important information. And on one level, it is an outcome measure in that it tells us we are doing our jobs really well. We are delivering our program with a high quality that parents really enjoy it. So we need to keep gathering that information. It's essential. But it doesn't always tell us if something has changed for the child or the family. So it's really to get our heads around evaluation. Feedback forms are essential. But what we're looking for is change and outcomes for family. What has actually changed? And you might think of families yourselves. I know when we were chatting, some families love having visits and they want you to continue visiting. But maybe they don't need, maybe the change is, not much is actually having a difference for them, or is making a difference for them. Okay. And the next one is so these are just some possible outcomes. So again, we've got two that are really clear outcomes. My anxiety reduced, and I now understand my child's behaviour. So in those two, which are the majority here, something has changed. Anxiety has gone down, and understanding of child behaviour has gone up. So they are changes. The other ones are, again, they're more of that feedback about how well you deliver the work you do. They supported me so much. That's great. I felt so welcome. That's great, but it doesn't tell us that something has changed. Okay, so I'm probably running out of time here. So yeah, this just a question we asked you about how confident you were about various elements, such as using questions and checklists, using psychometric measures like the TOPSY, the Warwick, describing to families why we use these tools and measures, and sharing the information back to families. And as you can see, a lot of us are in the mid-range. Obviously, the last session, the lowest score there is on the psychometric measures. So as I say, we'll spend more time on them on the third session. But hopefully for the other ones, after today and the next session, you might feel a little bit better about them. Okay, so outcomes, as I keep going on, and you're probably sick of hearing from me, is about change. And here we have a definition. Outcomes is what we wish to achieve, socially meaningful changes, generally defined in terms of expected changes in knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviours, condition, or status. Okay, so these are some questions we need to constantly be thinking, putting on our research hat on, is who do we serve and what problem are we trying to solve? How do we know our children and parents are better off, and can we measure that? How can we measure the quality of our service? All those lovely evaluation forms are great for that. How are we doing on the things now, and can we start to track it? Who are the people and partners we need to collaborate with? What is going to help us achieve the outcomes we want? And then what action are we going to take? And we need to keep that sort of cycle going in our heads so that we're improving and constantly reflecting on our practice. Okay, so evidence-based, I won't spend too much time on this, evidence-based home visiting. So at the end, we have our outcomes, are parents better off? We have other outcomes we might want to gather as well, is are we engaging the right families? Do they stay with us? Do some families only stay with us for a short while? And why is that? Is that because, you know, are they often the families who need the service more, or maybe they don't need the service? So we need to really look on who's engaging and participating in the outcomes. We also need to know what's making a difference, what we call mediating outcomes. And I suppose that's really what impacts our delivery. So if we have a shortage of public health nurses in our area, we're not going to get the referrals. And so we can't see families as early as we'd like. So they're all mediating outcomes. Implementation outcomes are how well we do it. That's the quality of the outcomes of the service we're delivering. And that they all are elements that we need to consider when we're talking about our evidence-based programs. And that's where we started with. We started with the evidence, and that tells us our practice, what we do and how well we do it. And then this is really that cycle. We need to gather some information across all these things so we can see, are we actually making a difference? What learning, what do we want to change? And then we feed that back up, what we might call program and practice learning, and we might try and do something different then. So this is evidence-based home visiting live, in action, ongoing. I won't get into too much here, but effectively, the term evidence-based, we use it all the time, and we just need to be a little bit careful. There's a difference between evidence-based practice and evidence-based programs. And effectively, when we're talking about evidence, you know, it's very easy. There's different levels of evidence, and we might do a quick survey ourselves, and that is evidence, but it's not at the same quality or standard as some of the evidence that's required for a program to be called evidence-based. And they're often at the very highest level of evidence with lots of RCTs, which are randomized controlled trials. So they're very expensive to do. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you have any questions about it, do ask at the end. But what I just want to stress is that, you know, that we need to look at evidence on an ongoing basis, whilst also acknowledging and being aware of the fact that in some of our work, evidence base is contested, and it can mean different things to different people. So that evidence base, in terms of being called an evidence-based program, does require a very high level of external research and randomized controlled trials. Okay, so we're getting on to yourselves now, and I'm going to be stopping talking soon. So we all agree, based on some of that information we've gathered so far, that we've presented so far, is that we need to gather some information to see, are we making a difference to children and families? And that can be just you and your family. You might just want information to know for you and your families that you're working with, that you're making a difference. Or it could mean, as a program, you want to have that information, or it could mean, as a country, we want that information. So just taking it at the very start, how do we know we're making a difference? Where does this data trail start? And it really does start with collecting a range of different data. And we need parents to share that information with us. And then that means, as a home visitors, we need yourselves to be asking questions. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now talking about asking questions. And this is what I call the art and bravery of asking questions. And as I said, you could be asking the questions for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's purely practice reasons, and the information you get doesn't go anywhere. It goes into your notes maybe, or it goes into your mind, your brain, your learning for that family. So there's sometimes we're asking questions and it's just really about our practice with the families. Other times when we're asking the questions, we actually are recording it, and we are then sending it somewhere so that we can learn more about all the families we work with. So I'm just bearing in mind that sometimes when you're asking, your program has asked you to ask various questions of a family, that there might be different reasons why you're doing that. So I know in the programs, in say the Community Families program that we've been with, some of the questions we ask as questions as part of the forums, the information doesn't go anywhere. It's purely for your own practice and your learning. And there might be different ways. So, for example, I know Maura from LifeStart isn't here today, but Maura spoke to me a little bit as well about how it's so important to get the family story. And you might have prompt questions that help you tease out that family story with the family. So there's different reasons why we're asking questions. I've called it the art and bravery because there is an art to it. You're not just going to go in there like the Stasi and ask multiple questions of a family and bombard them. There's a whole skill around that, around how, we're drawing on our training, and not just our program training, but you're drawing on training you might have done, say, trauma-informed training, infant mental health training, or mental health training. You're drawing on lots of information to know when you go in, because we never know what we're going to discover when we cross the threshold of a home. Is this the right time to even start this? Have I established a relationship with the family yet for them to open up and to trust me about these questions? Obviously, we need to be very clear about the reasons why we're asking these questions, and we'll talk a lot about that later. And so there is a real art in how and I sometimes call it a dance, because you might be kind of going in and not knowing what you're facing that day. So you're kind of constantly checking in on yourselves. I also call it the bravery of asking questions, because sometimes one of the home visitors I spoke to, who's going to share their experiences now, talked about having butterflies in their tummy sometimes before they ask a question. And I think that's really important to hold on to. Not that you should be nervous, and that part of this training is about becoming confident in asking questions. But at the same time, if we don't have those little butterflies, we can become a little bit complacent, or maybe we can do it kind of on automatic pilot. And that's what we want to avoid. But it does take, we do need to know that sometimes we do have to ask questions, and we might know that there's something going on for families. We might pick up that there might be mental health issues, or there might be something else going on. And we know that sometimes by asking that question, we might then get a response that we're not sure we're going to be able to respond to in that moment in time. So it is a bit of a bravery there. So I just want to share one story with you, and then we'll invite our panel on. Just check our time. Yeah, not doing too bad. So as part of the work I was doing for Community Families, we consulted with parents who had availed of the programme. And this is the feedback from one of the mums. Now, she was on her second child and she didn't have a home visitor on her first child. So the question I asked is, what training should home visitors have? And her response was about mental health. And she explained that on her first child, she was suffering quite severely from postnatal depression, but she didn't have the words or the language to raise this. She said that her husband knew about it, but they never spoke about it. So no words came to light. And she really wanted, her quote was then, some people know by looking, and perhaps if they got to know you and if they said it to you, then maybe you might even admit to it. So what obviously she really wanted was someone to come in and identify that perhaps she had mental health concerns and open that door for that conversation to happen. And that's, sometimes you might not always pick up on these cues, depending on, what's happening for you, what's happening for the family. And so really, if everyone going in and working with families had a question, that might have just opened the door then for this particular mum to share her experiences. She didn't have the words to bring it up herself. And also maybe she didn't know she could talk about mental health, with whoever was coming in or out. Maybe she thought, oh, they only deal with the baby, or they only deal with... So by asking the question, you're inviting parents and you're inviting families to share with you. So I just want you to reflect on that and think about how important then questions can be. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure you're fed up of me already. And we have a panel of home visitors. We've got, I'm going to stop sharing in a minute, but we've got a panel of home visitors. We've got Mary and Claire and Jane, all from programmes around the country. And they're going to share with us their experience and maybe especially when there's been a change, and we're all going to be undergoing changes, throughout our programs where we're now asking new questions or we're changing the program or whatever. So how that felt and maybe some of their anticipation of what might happen, what might not happen in this different way of working. So I'm going to stop sharing now and invite Mary and Jane and Claire to turn off your mute. And maybe just to reflect, maybe we'll start with Mary, maybe. And Mary, I wonder, can you reflect on how you felt about changes in your programme, which now meant that you were using a checklist or asking questions? So how did you feel about this initially, and what happened when you used that? So Mary, you want to go first?
Hi. Yeah, I suppose when we talked about trialing forms initially, I think that was during the development stage of the program. I remember being very resistant to it, really apprehensive about it. I suppose my feelings on it really were that one of the strengths or the main strength of our program was around relationship building and developing that real relationship of trust. I felt like we were possibly one of the only programs, maybe only services, that actually didn't go into parents where we had checklists and forms. It was very much about meeting parents where they were at, really listening. And I think the really listening was possibly the main value of the program at that time. And parents' feedback really, I suppose, tied in with that, because a lot of the feedback we got was that parents felt heard and they really valued being listened to. And I suppose for me, it was mainly, I suppose, a fear that using the forms or the checklists would get in the way of building that really lovely relationship.
maybe Jane, do you want to share your
Yeah.
experiences
Yeah,
of your concerns maybe, or your thoughts initially?
yeah. So quite similar to Mary, I'd say. We were all very nervous. We probably would have had a fear of the unknown, just when you literally that you haven't done something before, you can't even visualize yourself doing it. And the same as Mary, like relationships first, 100%. And so there would have been a lot of worries and concerns around how it would impact our relationship with the families, how would they react to the questionnaires, would they feel the questionnaires were invasive? Kind of those thoughts of, I'm a home visitor, I'm not a researcher. Would the family see us differently if we were in that role with them as well? And again, mostly about the impact on the relationship with the parents and the impact on the time it would take to do them with the parents as well. And I think massive fear of the unknown, definitely, just not being able to visualize this before we did it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Jane. And I'm going to come back to Jane and Mary, and maybe Claire, building on what Jane and Mary said, can you also add in what actually happened then when you did ask those questions? And we'll come back to Mary and Jane and get their take on their experience of, were their worst fears realized, or, off you go,
Yeah.
Claire.
Well, I think it was a little bit different for me because I had a meeting with yourself, Susan, long before, and I actually trialed out some of the forms, and I had done it on a family that I had quite a good relationship built up with. And I had explained to that family going in that I was trialing it out for it was long before the changeover. So I was quite confident in it. And I kind of like the technology side of it. I preferred having the tablet than the paper. Um, so I found that it went really well for me. But I know that that's because I had the advantage of doing it first. So I was looking forward to it, the kind of changeover. And don't get me wrong, there is still times I still carry paper copies with me because there is times that you're in rural areas and you don't have internet. So you have to have the paper copies because it doesn't always work out the way that you want it to.
So I
But
think,
I
Claire,
quite
what you're
welcomed
referring
the
to is
change.
the CRM system versus
Yeah.
paper. So we'll talk about CRM a little bit more another like next session, and it's great that you
Mm.
flagged it. And if I'm right, like, so Mary would have been involved in helping us design some of those tools. And I know in Jane, in terms of preparing for life, you worked a lot. And as Claire just said, we did a bit of like, let's test these things out. Let's see how it goes and get the feedback and tweak and, have that ongoing. And I hope that will continue for all of your programs, that you'll continuously, obviously you have to give things a chance and work with stuff and get the feedback, but then to come back and say, well, can we revisit this? So sorry, Claire, for jumping in there, but I wonder, can you tell us then some experiences of maybe when you asked questions, how using the questions changed your practice from previously?
Yeah, I find it is really good for opening conversations with families that are hard to engage with. Um, Families that they're kind of you're struggling for the conversation. It's very much so that they don't want to open up about certain things. So if you go in and do the you and your baby forms, the questions are there. So you can kind of revisit them then on in different visits and weeks to come. You can go back over it and say, last week I asked you this in the you and your baby form. I was just wondering how you feel about it this week. So it's kind of it changes from week to week. Um, and they've something to kind of like it's the you and your baby forms especially focus on the parents' well-being. And if you're doing like the 6 week old one, they've been sleepless nights and new babies and changing nappies, they haven't thought about themselves. So it really helps them think about themselves as well. But with one particular family I was working with, um, I was doing the 9 month you and your baby form, and it was mum's second child. And I've been working with the family for quite some time since her first child was born. And at the end of it, where it asks about do you have how many people can you rely on? And do you make time for yourself? Mum told me that she goes out at the weekends, that dad comes home from work and he takes over and minds the children, and she goes out at the weekends and she has all this time for herself, and she has um different appointments that she goes to, nail appointments, and she has the weekends to herself, which is something that I had been working with that family for quite some time and I hadn't known. And I thought that mum was struggling a lot more than what she was. And coming from that forum and that visit, I spoke to my coordinator after that, and we realised that we didn't need to be in as often because mum was doing really, really well on her own. So we kind of cut the visits back to every fortnight rather than every week after that.
Yeah. So just, I mean, in that case, and we'll come back, Mary and Jane, you might have some examples as well where, you know, the forms, you know, were not an extra or something you had to do, but actually became your practice. So you discovered something there, Claire, if I'm right, that perhaps from all your visits, and especially if there's language or cultural barriers, we might not be always getting, or we might be going in with, and we'll talk about this, our own assumptions. And sometimes the questions then can be helpful to say, actually, we weren't really, you know, we've reconfigured what we think about what that families might need. So I wonder, Mary and Jane, Mary, would you like to add to what Claire's just been talking about there?
Yeah, I suppose similarly, it was the same form that I used, slightly different in the sense that there were struggles in this family. So it was a family I had previously worked with, so I had a good relationship built. There were complex needs in the family, and I found it very hard on visits to get to the nub or to get to the specifics. There was a lot, you know, Mom talked a lot about how difficult life was. She found things so difficult. She was exhausted, but really difficult to get to what were the specifics. So I also used the You and Your Baby, and it was a check-in with the youngest, who was 18 months at the time. And I suppose I literally have the form here beside me just as a reminder, but you know, questions on responsive care, you know, there was questions around, do you have any questions with, you know, bathing or cutting nails, or, you know, these sort of questions. And as I went down through it, I almost filled every box, you know, difficulties with nail cutting, difficulties with noise of a hand dryer. Sleep was incredibly poor. So I suppose what it did was it built a picture of the, if you like, the needs of this child. And as Mom was telling the story about the needs of this child, it would remind her of the older kids. Oh, you know, this little one also has trouble with, you know, with sleep or with some sensory issues. So it was, I suppose I found that it was really beneficial in helping to identify the needs. Now that led on to I suppose we opened a Mehel, so there was a whole Mehel around this family then, and then the children were able to access OT. So I suppose for me, having the initial apprehension and being quite resistant to it, I suppose I really saw the benefit of the farm. And what struck me really was Mum wasn't a bit phased by the farm. In fact, when I was introducing it, I was a little, I suppose, not nervous in introducing it, but timid, I suppose, around introducing it initially. And she put me at ease, and she just said, I'm so used to filling forms. And then we got on with it. So I suppose there was positives in that, you know, that there was a good outcome for the family as a result of using the form.
I'm muted there. Sorry, Jane, do you want to add to that? Is there anything you want to add to that in terms of your experience?
I suppose it's same as Mary and Claire. We were pleasantly surprised, I suppose, when we did get going with how the vast majority of parents were extremely open, enthusiastic, interested in what we're doing once it was explained clearly. And to go back to what Claire said earlier, part of that was that we practiced and role played and refined over and over again as a team, so that we were presenting ourselves as calm, relaxed, and confident about it when we were going in. And I suppose that transmitted to the families as well. Overall, I mean, I suppose we realised that families, first that idea of I'm not a researcher, but families are going to be completely a lot more open and honest with you when you've already got that trusting relationship, rather than a stranger as a researcher coming in. It brought, as both people have said already, space to talk about topics that just may not have come up before, both positive and negative. So challenges that you may not realise the family had, but also space for a parent to sit back and go and reflect on parenting, which they don't have time to do while they are parenting, and go, actually, I'm doing a really good job at that, or look what I've achieved since this time last year. Our questionnaires have like a variety of measures on them, and we do them at pregnancy, birth, and then each year. So to be even able to look back now a number of years into it with a family and compare how things were before is really validating for the families as well. It's helped us get to know our families just on a whole other level, both individually and then kind of as a group, and the trends and things as well. And like that, sometimes it's the last thing you expect. Either someone's doing a lot better, or something will come up that you never would have. It gives the family language maybe to tell you about a challenge they're having where they couldn't even think of the words beforehand. And like also for us as well, where there is a concern around child development, it's given us structure and language to use around that and almost depersonalize it to be able to talk about where there is a challenge and what the next steps are. So again, completely pleasantly surprised
Yeah.
from what we worried about in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really great feedback. And as you're talking there, I'm just thinking, as you say, the feedback you get could be positive, or it could be highlighting a challenge. And you just never know what question might that be. And I suppose my next question is, and I know, Mary, you have a response to this, and maybe the others, if you want to chip in, to think about a time maybe when you did ask a question and perhaps you got a reaction from a parent that was unexpected. And, I'm thinking myself, from talking to the teens, about that, and one of the questions in community families we ask is around minding your well-being, but it is about healthy eating, and without any, it's not saying are you eat, it's have you got time to manage to look after yourself, and as part of that, are you managing to eat and prepare yourself meals like that. But it actually opened a whole conversation that the home visitor didn't anticipate, that was about anorexia and an eating disorder that she would never have known. And that would have, it then strengthened the relationship of trust going forward. So that's one thing. And that mum was really happy to share that information in that trusted relationship. So I wonder, and the other thing that Jane has touched on there, and Claire, is that that time for practicing, rehearsing, and feeling that if you go kind of, and while inside you might feel anxious and timid, and I've flagged at the start that that's important to hold on to that, because that's your, what they say, actors going on stage, they always have that little nervousness in their tummy, and if they don't have that, it's an issue for them. So it's important to constantly feel that, but at the same time, what you're portraying to the family is a more confident, that there's sharing this information is really good. So I wonder, maybe Mary, back to you, if you have, I can think of a time where you got a reaction that perhaps you weren't expecting, and then how you manage to deal with that, because that's where your coordinator, your team, and your management, and as Jane said, the role play really is important.
Yeah, I have a few that come to mind, but there's one in particular, and this is in the past, I suppose, before I was using forms, or using questionnaires with them. And I suppose the reason I give this example is because it's managing that situation when you're there, and it comes really unexpected. So it was a parent I had a good relationship with, and I was visiting of a morning. She had let the kids off to school, and she was telling me about an incident that happened that was very upsetting. It came to the stage where she was completely overwhelmed, and she had said something like to the kids when they were going, "Mommy won't be here when you come home in the evening." But she said it in a cross tone and was really upset. And I suppose that when I say it threw me, I kind of went, it's almost like a gut punch when you hear something like that. And I did think, gosh, I wonder what was the thinking behind this, or what was going on for her. So, she continued to tell me her story. It was quite distressing and overwhelming and all the rest of it. And I suppose I really did see that there were red flags here for mental health. And I know when Susan talked about the butterflies earlier on, that's me, because I just knew I had to ask, what sometimes we call that difficult question. I really had to ask this mom, was she thinking of suicide? And I asked it, and I suppose her response, it was unexpected, in the sense of, like, she really got irate and upset, and she stood up, and she was between shouting and crying and saying, how could you ask me that question? You're not listening to me. You didn't listen to me. But she was really, really upset. And I remember, like, I can really remember this response to that, which was, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry that I didn't hear you, that I wasn't listening to you. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that I upset you. And I mean, there wasn't an option really when I look at it, other than to say, I'm going to go now. Now I felt safe in leaving because her partner was upstairs. So I said, I'm going to leave now. Really sorry I upset you, and I will check in with you later on. Like, for me, that was really important. And I did. I checked in with her later. She was okay. She had calmed down on the phone. And we had arranged to meet. It was before the end of that week. I remember it was in the same week. And when I called back to her again, no, she was calm. She was in her dressing gown. She was still struggling. But I suppose it transpired that she did need a referral to mental health. She admitted there and then that she, it had thrown her, because her worry was that in admitting it, her children would be taken away. So that all transpired. But I suppose the emphasis here really is around the unexpected and the response to it. And I have to say, it was a calm response. I suppose what helped me is I was confident, and I knew in my gut that this was the right thing to do. That question needed to be asked. And I suppose I often say to myself, like, what's the alternative if you don't ask that question? It might never get asked. It's like, when you smell gas, that ad on telly when it says, when you smell gas, make the phone call. If you don't ask it, will the next person ask that question? So I suppose for me, that was it. And I suppose briefly on another one was where I did use the phone. I did use the form, sorry. And it was the intake form, the information form. And one of the questions on it is, to help us to respond to your needs, can you tell us about if you have any health, disability, or sensory needs? And I remember I had a really good relationship with this parent, and we were easing along in the form. And then all of a sudden, when I came to this question, she paused and there was no response. She just looked down at the ground and there was no response, and a really awkward silence ensued. And I thought, you think really quickly. And then I said, okay, we'll pass on that one. And we finished out the form. But there was a tension. I felt there was a change in the relationship right there and then. And I suppose for me, because it was probably one of those early days when you start using the form first, and I thought, oh my God, this is really reinforced for me my initial apprehension with it. And I left. It was okay. I left. I had made an appointment to come back again. And again, it transpired on the next visit, when I was thinking, gosh, I probably won't go there again on this visit. She asked, could we talk about the incident the previous week? And I said, yeah, sure, of course we can. And she told me that she had struggled with chronic anxiety all of her life. Her parent had died when she was young, and she'd really felt she'd never got the support that she needed. And what transpired actually is, once we got her involved with supports and all the rest of it, is that she had an underlying ADHD. She was undiagnosed. And really the anxiety, I suppose, was all around that. But again, whereas I had been kind of saying to myself, this has kind of fulfilled my initial apprehension, it actually showed me that, that simple question really helped, I suppose, this mom, get the support that she needed.
Yeah, no, that's great, and great feedback there. And I don't know, I'm just conscious of time, but I'm just wondering I hope we're going to have time for some questions and answers. So, and I see some questions, comments coming in on the chat there. But I suppose what we really wanted to explore here is sharing the experiences from Claire and Mary and Jane about kind of that initial fear, and then actually what happened as a result of that. And I know, Claire, you mentioned at the start, and just really quickly on this one, I suppose, because we'll spend a bit more time on it, is one of the things, you had the benefit of going in, and it's a really nice way of breaking the ice for yourself, I suppose. I think you can tell me if you agree, Claire, was that you said, we're trying this out and we want your feedback. And I know Mary and I'm sure Jane, you guys did it as well. So that when it's a nice way to help you get into the swing of things as well, because you're inviting parents for that feedback. And we should always do that at the end of any questions or forms we ask. We should always ask parents for the feedback. So Claire, was that something that when you were introducing the form in the first instance, that helped? And I suppose just to say, within that particular program, we're still we've got a draft leaflet of what we might share with parents about why we're doing this work, and we're teasing that out and feeling more confident in explaining why we're doing these questionnaires. But was that a help for you, Claire, at the start?
Yeah, I probably overused it, to be honest, for myself, probably because when we were doing the changeover from community mothers to community families, and everything was being introduced, it was with families that I was already visiting. So I had these relationships with these families. So I was being honest with them and telling them about the changeover. And then I was saying, I was kind of putting it on me, saying, oh, we're changing over from paper and now I have this tablet and I want to try it out. So can I try out these forms with you? And they all were very positive reactions to it. So they all wanted to help out. So I probably did overuse it a little bit. But now I kind of tell them the importance of doing the forms and how it tracks through their baby's life and how they can have access to it. You know, we can print it out or whatever, they can have access to it, but it's good for keeping track of baby's progress. And that is to help improve our service and improve our work as well that we do.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes I still use the little changeover thing.
So, I mean, and I suppose what I hope is by the end of our sessions today, we'll all feel more confident about, because we're all on that journey, and we've got some home visitors who haven't even started. As I said, we've got some home visitors who said they've got zero experience and some with 30 plus years experience. So, we're all on that journey, and we have to find, but we do need to be honest and transparent about why we're doing it. And Jane, I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit, because you guys have done a lot of work on that.
Yeah, like we're lucky to be a number of years into it now. So like with Claire at the start, we were like, it's a pilot. We would really love you to, and give your feedback on how you found it. And we refine things based on feedback as well. But now we're luckily to be in the position that people have it explained to them at registration, but we still ask for their feedback after every questionnaire, and we'll feed that back as well. And even if it's been explained at registration when you're, heavily pregnant, you need to be reminded every time. So we kind of introduce, we talk a lot about why we're doing it. We kind of say we want to make sure that what we're doing is supporting the families we work with and having a positive impact, because there's no point in us coming out here unless we know what you actually need from us and what's going on for families, like individually and kind of on a societal level. And we say we're always kind of looking at what we do and why we do it and if it's actually working for you and your child. And we're always interested to know how you feel about the service and are you getting what you need from it. And we'd always make a big point of saying, it helps us to get to know you better, and the better we know you, the better we can support you, and that it gives you space to kind of stop and think about how parenting is going for you and kind of acknowledge what's going well as anything that you have a challenge with. And quite often, sometimes parents will say, "Oh, do you need it for your funders, or do you have to have stats?" And I'll say, honestly, yeah, we do need to have stats, but also it's really, really helpful for us as an organisation, but also as a wider thing, to have lots of information about the families that are using our service and how that might compare with families on a national level, but also what do the families in this area need. And sometimes people are actually quite excited about feeding into that as well. So once we're really clear about all the multiple reasons why we do it, people are generally pretty happy with that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Listen, I want to thank Jane and Mary and Claire for sharing all their expertise. And before they disappear, I mean, we're a bit tight on time, but if anyone has a question they want to ask, I know there's been some comments in the chat there. One of the questions from Rebecca was, do you think the timing of bringing the questionnaire into the house is essential? And do you bring it in at the start of the relationship with the family? So I wonder, would any of the panel like to just talk about that at all? Maybe Jane, I don't know.
Yeah, for us, so we have one in pregnancy, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and 4 years. So we have a window we have to do it in to be relevant in terms of, say, for example, ASQs and things like that, and for it to be at the time point for each age. I don't know, I get very confused with the evaluation team, understands the reasons why. But so we are tied to that window, but within that we have freedom in terms of, yeah, you might know that something is going on for that family and you're not going to bring it now, but you might make another appointment for next week. With pregnancy, we try to obviously have the registration visit first and get to know a family a little bit, and it depends on the circumstances. There have been times we've gone to the house, we've pre-arranged and we're going to do a questionnaire, all hell is broken loose, and we just always put the relationship first. But time and also preparation, that the family is really aware that you're bringing this in and that they can change their mind as well. So definitely has an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. And lots of comments there, just acknowledging that difficult experience you had, Mary, and just the bravery and how you manage that, and how to be careful. And that's someone's just talked about having the tact. As I said, that's why I call it the art, because it really is a skillful role. And Jane summed that up there, that you'll go into a house and you might not be able to do anything that day because, you might best made plans and all that, but there's no point. It's not appropriate. As Jane said, the relationship comes first. Before we move on, is there any other questions anyone wants to ask from the group? I can't see anyone, so you might just, I can't see everyone. If anyone does, you can just pop your hand up. No. Okay. Well, if that's the case, keep putting in questions and queries in the chat. But we'll move on. But I just really want to thank Mary, Jane, and Claire for sharing their expertise. And we might have Jane, and we might have some people back again for the different sessions. So thank you very much. Really, really helpful and informative. Okay, so I'm just going to close this off and I'm going to share my own. Oh, did I miss a question there? Sorry. No. No. Okay, so I'm just we'll go back if that's okay, to where we were. And we'll have time, don't worry, for breakout room, don't worry. So you'll get a chance to have a quick toilet stop and then catch up with your peers. Okay, so just really quickly, I just thought I'd put this up here, and this is a tool called the Ladder of Inference. It sounds a bit complicated, but basically, I guess what I wanted to reflect on the girls, sorry, I don't know what's the right term, girls, our ladies, our colleagues, our home visitors who just spoke to you all, they really reflected on maybe sometimes going in with assumptions, and we all do that. We're all going to do that. We're all going to go in and say, oh, this is what I think might be going on for a family. And what happens is that then shapes the observations you make, because when you go in with certain assumptions, we then only look or see certain things. So this is a tool just to help us constantly check on our observations and prompts us to look. What it has at the bottom is the pool of observable data. There might be so much more information there, but we're not looking at that because our assumptions are forcing us to pick up on other things. So essentially, some of the checklists and the tools that we use, it helps us widen our pool of data. We have more information, and everyone just talked about that earlier, and challenge our assumptions. So it's really important that we keep that in mind, and that's really good practice for all of us in our work with children and families. So we're gathering data and we're asking questions, and I suppose what we really wanted to get across is that this isn't something that we want people to feel is an added extra. Oh no, now we have to do these forms. Because as you've heard, sometimes the forms can be the intervention itself. Sometimes the questions or what arises can be the actual work and the most beneficial work. So we want to try and make sure that when we're asking these questions and we're gathering data, be it for our own practice learning with this family or for wider program learning, that it can be an intervention in itself. So it can really improve practice with that family. And the other thing to say is, and Jane touched on this, and we've tried to do this as well with the community families for some of our checklists, it's not about getting it all done in one visit. Maybe you can spread it out over 2 visits. You don't have to feel rushed. And if a topic comes up, you can talk about it. Obviously, for some of the more standardized measures, they do need to be done pretty much there and then. You can't, obviously, you're not going to, if it's not the right time, you're not going to do it. But they're harder to sort of do half now and half later. So it's about kind of having that approach though in the back of your mind and not feeling that you're on automatic pilot or you're following some sort of strict, mandate that you have to have this done. So holding that, it can be an intervention. It can also promote equity and fidelity. So we talked about fidelity to the program. So you're actually doing what the program needs to be done, but you're also ensuring that all areas are covered for all families, because you may go in and if you're just responding to the need might be sending you in one direction and you're not actually getting to talk about something else. So it means all families are getting the opportunity to cover a wide range of areas with you. So for me, that's really important in terms of equity. It can improve your practice for other families in the service. So if you're learning something about this one family, that might be really helpful to see what might work for other families. And then when it's anonymized information, then we can learn more at a program level, and then at a national level, we can learn more and champion our learning to share nationally so that we can make things better for all children and families. And I suppose the caveats for all that is just those practice pieces here, which is just to allow time, don't rush. You know, if you can pause and complete it on another day. And then that piece, maybe always ask parents how they felt about it. Did something come up for them that they weren't thinking about? You know, what did they take away from it? And ask for feedback from the parents, but also give the feedback. And Claire mentioned there, it's an aspiration. We're not fully there yet, but to share that information back with families, wouldn't it be lovely if they owned it? And Jane talked about that, how you can look back over the time you've worked with the family and they can see the change themselves. So this is me many years ago when I worked in a partnership company, and I used to pull out this phrase when I had a nasty form that I had to hand to families that had all this ethnicity information on it and all sorts of stuff, and I didn't know how to introduce this to families. And I would say, could you please fill this out for our funders? So, you know, and I've heard other people saying it as well. And it's that piece of why are we doing this? And I suppose what I want to say is that is not, and Jane and Claire kind of spoke about this a bit. I'd rather you didn't do that. Because think about it, when we're asking families, why are they filling out, we're inviting families to share information with us. We don't want them to feel, well, if they don't fill this out, they're not going to get the money, so we better fill that out. You know, we have to think about the language we use when we're introducing these forms. I mean, Jane talked about it nicely at the end there, where she said, you know, yeah, some of it is to show our statistics at the end and so on, and to show, you know, why the work we're doing is important. But think about the first way you're going to introduce these forms to families, and that line isn't the line that, you know, that I was using in the past, isn't the right line. To maybe think about how families might feel about that. So they should always feel there is no obligation. Nobody has to fill out anything. But at the same time, you're inviting them to share and be a partner with you in this learning journey. Okay, so how can we invite them to share? So be confident and transparent. And Jane touched on that, you know, feel that you know what you're doing and that you own it and you know that this is important for a reason. So explain to them how it can, in the first instance, best meet the parents' needs, you know, and that learning from working with one family can help work with similar families. And if you're worried about the ethnicity type information or the demographic information, you know, one of the reasons we really gather that is to see what works for different families in different circumstances. And that can really help, because if it works for one family, it might work for another. But also it can help us advocate for the needs. And again, Jane touched on that, you know, the needs of the family is in your particular area. You can, you know, housing might be well, it's an issue for everybody at the moment, but, you know, you could flag that at an anonymized level. And then obviously sharing information anonymously within a program or nationally, we can see if home visiting is making a difference to the families. Okay. I want to get you into the breakout room soon. So just quickly, we need to spend time, and this is what we're going to focus on in the breakout rooms, thinking about what supports you need as a home visitor when you're collecting data, at that point where you're interfacing with the parents. And I talked about transparency and that piece where, you know, information is owned by the parents, and we need to be very open about that. This is their information, but we might invite them to be partners in our learning. So we need to also be really mindful of things like trauma-informed practice. And, you know, one of the reasons we're also nervous about maybe sometimes using forms, or we can be, is that sense that families have been through an awful lot where information was pulled from them and not given back to them, and they felt like they were being observed or judged or tested. So we need to really make sure that we speak to our team and our coordinators about accessing training around trauma-informed practice and delivering and introducing parents to work with us in this way with all that information in mind. Training, team discussions, role play, Jane mentioned that, safe practice, and then inviting the families. Another really brave thing, I'm not sure if anyone's doing this at the moment, but one thing you could always do is when you are delivering your training to new home visitors, ask parents to be part of it and see what feedback they say. If you have parents, you can. So this is, again, really quickly in the funnel here, you have your core in the light blue, your core program training that you might have. You've got support from your supervisor, who's a go-to person, your coordinator, whatever terminology you use in your program, they are your go-to people, you know, and then you should, you know, in terms of reflective practice within your team and so on. So that's your programmatic piece. But then we need to look outside that at other training, like trauma-informed practice, relational working, infant mental health working, cultural sensitivity, knowledge about adult mental health. That's come up already. You know, Mary really spoke profoundly about that. And if it's okay, Mary, I know from working with you in the past, sometimes that other training that you get externally can equip you with words or phrases. And I know Mary told me about that in the past, that certain phrases she picked up on some of the HSE training really helped you, if I'm right, kind of address some of those more difficult questions. And same with domestic violence. But I suppose we must all kind of, oops, sorry, I've gone, what have I done? Yeah. All think about what best practice things we need to think about when working with families. So things like consistency, trust, responsiveness. And I think that came up there when Mary described the difficult, when she had that difficult conversation. First thing she did was in a way respond by once she left, and she checked back in and followed up. So we picked up and we were responding to the issues that Mary experienced. Obviously, confidentiality is crucial, the way we communicate, and that piece around transparency and being reliable. And data management. And of course, and I think it came up there in the chat around culture and language as barriers, and they are definitely a barrier. So we really need to be thinking all these things through before we invite parents to participate in this way. Okay, so I think now, yeah, so we have time for some breakout rooms. I've run over a little bit, so apologies. Let me just think what time we said we come back at. Could I ask maybe if we come back at 1:45? So the questions that we really want you to tease out and chat about is what you've heard so far, obviously, and what do you need as a home visitor to support your confidence and to support you in asking these questions. And when I say asking questions, I'm thinking about filling in checklists, filling in forms, and I know from the comments on the Mentimeter previously, some of you have asked around those standardized measures. So, you know, if you want to flag some of your thoughts on that, that would be helpful as well in anticipation of our next session. So if that's okay, I'll stop sharing and ask Michelle maybe. Are people happy about what they're doing in the rooms? Maybe you could give me some thumbs up or something. Yeah. I'll put that
question into the breakout room anyway.
Thanks a million, Michelle. That's brilliant.
Okay, you're all going to be sent into your breakout rooms. We're just doing it automatically, so wherever you land, you land. Okay, and I have a set. I'll call you out after the quarter.
And just one thing, could someone please just take notes and agree to feedback? So last time it was, you guys are all amazingly diligent and, you know, from the Mentimeter being filled in so well. And I know from the sessions we had in November, people were so good at feeding back. So we will take on board your feedback, so we do need it. And you know, even if you're the person who's taking the notes, if you want to take a photograph of it, and you can send it on to us, or we'll take notes when you feedback, and we've got it recorded anyway as well. So so do make sure you've got somebody to feedback. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
I'm gonna do
Michelle.
it now. Okay.
Okay.
Susan, can we just ask as well, can we get a picture?
Oh yeah, of
So
course.
then I'll just put up a post on Twitter then before before I sign off for the day, because I was working till 8 o'clock last night. So
There's so many
I'm
of us
taking a
here. I
half
think
day.
you probably need 2 pictures, do you?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I think just filing back in, and just if you heard Michelle there, she just wants to see if we can take a photo. If people are happy to have a photo taken.
Why does my screen do this? Why am I a retard in this? Oh,
Mute.
We have those days. I've had one of those panics
Yeah.
earlier when I was having technology issues. So if everyone's happy, Michelle, I'll leave it up to
Yeah,
you.
either turn on your screen if you're happy enough, and then your screen will be off. If not, it's fine.
And give us a wave.
Yeah. Just give me 1 sec.
You tell us when to go, Michelle. We're waving and you're not
Oh
ready.
yeah, wave. Go on, keep waving, because I'm actually doing it. Because as I said, I have to go on. I have to do a few of them now. Okay, you're done. Thank you.
How
Thanks
many
so
rooms?
much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Michelle, how many rooms did we have there? Was it
We had 8 rooms.
8 rooms? So I wonder, could we go to breakout room number 1? And I don't know who was where. People probably don't know which rooms we were in. Let me see. Do we know? Can you call out some names from breakout room 1?
That was our room.
Who's that there?
Jen O'Neill.
Jen? Great, Jen.
Yeah. So
Can you give-
just 3
Yeah.
kind of things that came up. One was having access to the use of a tablet would be supportive.
Yeah.
And the other thing was knowing the timing of when to do the forms, so that you're not walking into kind of a chaotic situation and trying to get it done,
Yeah.
and that you get to know the family first and it doesn't feel rushed. And then
Yeah.
kind of the third thing was in and around like the more difficult questions to ask, like maybe things around mental health, and kind of know the home visitor knowing exactly why we ask those questions, because
Yeah.
some parents do ask, why are you asking me this? Is this relevant? Like
Yeah.
one of the girls in the group gave an example of when she was asking the parent her ethnicity, and the parent actually asked, why are you asking me this? How is this relevant to the program? So I know like some people could be maybe caught on the hop if they're asked something and they're like, oh, actually, I don't know why that question's on the form. I don't know why we ask it. So that thing you were talking about earlier about confidence.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing why we're asking each thing and why it's needed, why it's helpful for planning going forward.
No, that's great, Jen. And that's why I specifically mentioned things like ethnicity earlier, because they're sometimes the more sensitive issues. And I think
Yeah.
really it's about, as you say, if we own why we're doing and we're really clear that, oh, sorry. Can you still hear me? Yeah.
I can, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what I pressed there. But yeah, so you know, understanding and it could be ethnicity, like as what, and cultural, because what works for some families, and it's understanding how we can work in a different way with different families. So yeah, that is really important. And I think what we each need to take away from, say, today is bringing it back to our teams and creating that space where we can practice that and tease that out and be clear about why we're asking all these questions, and kind of, you know, always have the space to come back as a team and say, you know, this is what happened, and this, am I doing it, you know, has anyone, and sometimes you'll hear, and that's why I think it's really important for us to have the home visiting panel. Sometimes it's great to watch other people doing it, and someone mentioned about shadowing and role, you know, shadowing people at the start and seeing how they do it. And like it's about borrowing phrases and ways of doing things that fit with what we're trying to do, but listening to how other people do it. Just to say, a lot of this can be quite new for programs, and we're all on a journey, so I'm not sure any of us have mastered the right way of delivering it to families, but there are really good ways of doing it. So that's a really great feedback, Jen. Thanks so much for room 1. So sorry, I'll try and stop talking because I want to get us all out on time. Room 2, anyone know who was in room 2?
Yeah, I was room 2. We were very much the same as what Jennifer had said, apart from none of us seemed to be worried about not having a tablet. I don't know how we would manage without it, but yeah, much the same. I think Deirdre had said in hers as well, just to role modeling, even coming back into our own before we go out to the families, if we're clear and confident about why we're asking what we're asking. So yeah, much the same as group 1.
Yeah. And I think, I know we've tried to do it recently in community families, and I know Louise in Preparing for Life has done it as well, it's kind of like what you might call a data map. So it just helps you know what each piece of information you're gathering and where it's going. Is it going somewhere else, or is it staying just in your notes? But also why you're gathering it. So I think that sort of piece. Now it's a huge piece of work as well. So be patient with the people who are involved in developing your programs or who are your managers and coordinators, because some of this is quite complex as well. So do bring that back and maybe suggest, can we do this? Can we have a map where we're really clear about that? So that's really great feedback, Lynn. Thanks so much. Room 3.
Yeah, room 3, I'm just going to go over a couple of things, and there seems to be a common theme from Jennifer and Lynn. It was the why, explaining the why of asking the questions. And one member in the group, Eva, I think she was from Preparing for Life, she did tell us that they have a document explaining the question. So I just suggested maybe that's something Shelley and Susan could link in with, that we could share among the team today, so they have an explanation of why the questions are being asked. And role play came up as suggestion as well, and I think definitely just from listening to Mary and how she handled that situation, the safe talk suicide training, I think would be really important for everyone to have it, because to be able to ask that question and be confident in asking it within that moment is vital for anyone who has made a remark like that. And then having the questionnaires maybe in different languages, because some people said a lot of parents are just happy to sign, and a lot of the questions they don't really understand fully, and having the language or translate it would make it a lot better for families.
Yeah, no, they're all great points, Linda. Thanks so much. And I think that piece about the languages is great. And some of the standardized measures or the psychometric measures that we're going to talk about in the 3rd session, they are translated. It's harder to translate our own checklists. So you're right about that. And I think it also means that when you're filling out these forms, and something we've tried to promote is doing it kind of shoulder to shoulder. You might be writing or you might be typing in something, but parents can see what you're doing. And I think that's really important, or they can do it themselves. So that there's that joint ownership. Just the piece about the document, and I think it's just each program will have different questions, so it might not be relevant to each program, but I definitely think I know we've got something in draft around why we're asking these questions in a generic way that we can certainly share or anonymize or take out the logos or whatever. And I'll chat with Louise after if they have something about introducing the concept of these things to parents. But I think you're going to need to go back to each program and kind of know what the reason is, because you might be asking a question in Life Start or Parent Child Plus or Community Families, and there might be different reasons
yeah.
why you're asking them. So, but
Yeah.
definitely it's a really good point, Linda. Okay, room 4. Sorry, I'll try and keep my chat down.
Hey,
And-
it's Lisa here. Yeah, we kind of had the same supports coming up as well as the other 3 rooms. The biggest one I think would have been the role play. So that like you can do that with your colleagues, like the difficult questions that you're going to face, that they can ask you them and kind of put you on the spot so that you have to think about your answer. And the more you practice saying them, the more you'll feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because you can say, oh, you can go in and do this and you can go in and do that, but when you're actually in that situation, in that home, in front of that family, it's
Yeah.
way harder to say those things. So to actually model that before you go in. And then one other thing that came up was that a lot of us are working with direct provision and IPAS centres a lot, and maybe training around the process of like what the families go through, etc. We had one girl that was due to go in to see a mum that had recently had a baby, a 5-day-old, and mum had then been moved because she had now 2 children and the room wasn't adequate for her, and there was no notice of kind of like, oh, mum is gone, etc. So just kind of more information around kind of the structure and kind of the process that people in IPAS centres go through.
Yeah, no, that's great, Lisa. And I think maybe Michelle might take note of that for future training sessions. And otherwise that's really great. I think the role play is definitely coming across. And I suppose one of the things is as well is you're never going to know what reaction you get sometimes. So it's about nearly having a tool bag of different responses handy. And as you say, Lisa, that they're rehearsed so that they kind of can come quickly to you without being too, you're going to still be authentic to who you are. But yeah, no, that's excellent feedback. Thanks so much, room 4 and Lisa. Room 5. Anyone know who was in room
I've
5?
actually no idea what room I was in, so maybe that was, I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Right. I think they've all been said already, but the role plays again, yeah, and having, respond all different reactions when you're the parent in the role play, but also hearing your own voice answer the question or ask the question out loud before you ever ask it in someone's house. People felt they needed support tailoring it to their own families or having the confidence to tailor it to the individual family that they're meeting. Again, support around language barriers, big one for everyone as well. Support around just building up their own confidence, which probably goes back to the role plays. And then also overcoming families' negative experiences of other agencies who've looked for information from them or their suspicions around why we're there. Yeah.
No, that's great, Jane. I'm sorry, I heard your voice before I could see your name, so I was at the start. No, that's great, and I think that's really, really good. And I think trauma-informed practice can really help with that, really, in terms of understanding what has happened. And obviously, we get caught in the crossfire a little bit there. And I think, yeah, no, that's really good feedback. So the other agencies, okay, room 6. Or who else hasn't spoken yet? Anyone from room 6 or any room? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think we were room 6.
Yeah, great, Leona.
But I think everything has at this stage now been said. Just familiarizing yourselves with the form so that you can make it more of a conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, going in. Something else that's pretty much it. And then just even if there was a little bit of information around, this is so basic now, but it catches me every time around hotspotting. So like just like every time I pull out the tablet in someone's house, I'm like, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? And I never know if it is or isn't. And that kind of makes me anxious as well to pull out the tablet.
I understand. Yeah. And that's
Um,
probably more a CRM technical question, but we can always come back to it because it depends on what program you're involved in and whether there's a downloadable version. But yeah.
Oh, that would be great if there was, I suppose. Like if you could just have it downloaded. Yeah.
Maybe go back to your own program first and flag it. Ask them. It depend on their CRM system.
I will.
Yeah, no, that's great, Leona. Thanks so much. But these are all the practical things. And if you're too busy worrying about the hotspotting, then that means your attention is distracted. And
Exactly.
as we said, you know, for tuning into reading, as I said, we described it earlier as a dance where you're kind of reading, you're looking for responses from the parents. And Mary described that, you know, with the other where things went frosty when she asked a very generic question about health, but things got frosty. So we need to have our antennae, we need to be fully open to what's going on. So yeah, no, that's great, Leona. And sorry, Michelle's prompting me, it's 1 p.m. I'm really sorry. Is there any other feedback? Has anyone not spoken that they want to say, or have we kind of covered everything?
Can I just say, bring it back
Carol.
to Mary as well, back to the mental health. And I know we're not always going to recognise the signs, but just for the reaction that we're going to have as well. And kind of, obviously we'll have to, you'll know the family, but you might not always know what the question is going to come. Also the shadowing families, we talked about that. It's vital for new people coming on board. Also to recognise children with sensory issues, global development delay, where, you know, maybe a bit more training, reflection and self-care after visits, counselling sessions, and also support if your coordinator is not available, that you can ring a co-worker, because you might come back from out of a visit and might be answers questions that have been asked, and you just need someone to talk to. And I find that is one of the biggest things for myself, that you do need that support when you come out, to be able to ring someone.
No, that's great, Carol. That's great from that room. That's really important feedback. That's really great. And it is 1 o'clock now. So, and just as I can't help myself, I'll just say one more thing, which is, and Carol brought it up there, which is that piece where if you might have concerns about development, and Mary and Claire and Jane kind of alluded to, sometimes if there is something you want to address, sometimes having the questions on a form give you the avenue to get in there. So if you are concerned already about development, but mum's not, having the questions can make that come more explicit. So just to bear that in mind, but definitely Carol mentioned self-care and reflection and support. So listen, I think that's probably us. I want you all to be able to relax now and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. But can I thank you all? We've had over 50 on the call, and it's really just so great to
74,
hear from you.
Susan.
Oh, 74. Wow.
Yeah, at the top of the peak, it was 74.
So thank you so much for all your input, and we're going to take everything back that you've told us. Our next session is more about outcomes and what outcomes we're going to choose, why we're using them and so on, and the national picture. And then we have heard all your concerns. So Michelle's here from the training subgroup of the Home Visiting Alliance. So anything that wasn't specific to outcomes that we're not going to address, we'll keep a list of those, like mental health and so on. But yeah, I'll stop talking and say cheerio, and we'll see you on the 14th of March as well. Michelle will put this video up on the Home Visiting Alliance webpage as well. So thanks everyone. Enjoy your weekend and the rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.